Good evening, everyone. We're so delighted to welcome you here tonight to what will be a really fantastic panel. It's on reproductive health. Can we find common ground? And I know that this event is sold out, so there'll probably be a number of others joining, but I'd love to get started as we're live streaming. My name is Peggy Clark. I'm with the Aspen Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you all here to be with us today. This is a fantastic panel. Overjoyed to hear this. And it's really my very great honor to introduce Pat Mitchell, who's our moderator. Pat is both a dear friend and really a mentor to me and to many in this room. Pat was the first woman chair of PBS, among many firsts. She has always thought about how to meld the media with social activism, and she's a huge champion for women's rights and health, and an amazing human being that I have had the great honor to play around with, travel with, work with, and I am looking forward to our next adventure, which is going to be this panel right here. So Pat, thank you for finding the time to come here in your busy schedule to be with us at Spotlight Health, and I'd really like to thank all of the heroes that are on this panel for joining us tonight. So let's start with a big round of applause. Thank you.
I think we should give Peggy Clark a round of applause for bringing us all here and for curating what has already been an exceptional experience. And just how long have we been together? It seems like a week already. As every day is so packed with interesting subjects and such incredible people who have chosen to come to Spotlight Health and share their stories. I'd also like to say that Peggy is one of the most optimistic people that I've ever known, or she would never have put this panel at 7:30 in the evening and called it common ground on the two subjects which there's never been common ground. Reproductive women's health, from birth control to abortion. This has been a minefield full of political passion, convictions of faith, all kinds of policy differences, and there has been an almost impossible and often irreconcilable discussion about women's right to choose, women's rights to make all the choices about their bodies. And I have to say that this panel probably represents more of a common ground on the question. Excuse me.
It's your water.
I think I will have a bit. Excuse me. I'll be right back. After I fall off the chair. Let's start that again. Because I look around this room and there's no way for me to know where you are on this subject. And we want to hear from you, and so we're going to make this as interactive as we possibly can. I've encouraged the panelists to make this more of a conversation among themselves, since they are the people who are on the front lines in many different ways on this subject. And also, I want to talk in a way that gives each person in this room the feeling that they were heard. I think on this subject, as well as almost every other subject on which there are deep divides, the kind of divides that we feel maybe more acutely in this country now than we felt in a very long time. So let me introduce you to these people that Peggy rightly has identified as heroes, because they are. They have chosen to be on these front lines. And I'm going to start at the end with someone that truly is a hero. I've seen people coming up to you, Dr. Willie, over and over again in the last couple of days and saying how much your work as an OBGYN who has chosen to specialize in providing safe abortions for the women in Alabama and Georgia, and becoming such an advocate for reproductive rights for all women. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Willie J. Parker. And sitting next to, and by the way, he's asked me to call him Dr. Willie. I tried the Dr. Parker stuff, and he said, nah. No, Dr. Willie sounds a lot more like family. Next to him is a young woman whose writings you may have been reading. If you read Teen Vogue, or if you've been reading about Teen Vogue, and so many people have, because Teen Vogue has taken this very out front, sometimes controversial, confrontational, and new approach to dealing with some of the most difficult challenges for the young people in this country and around the world. And Vera Papisova has led that. She's the wellness editor, I think the first ever wellness editor at Teen Vogue. Please welcome Vera. Vera's not only written some of the first articles about some really difficult subjects in Teen Vogue, but has also created a couple of campaigns that I hope we'll get to talk about a bit later. Next to Vera, a woman who probably needs no introduction in any room like this. This is Teresa Younger, ladies and gentlemen, the president of the Ms. Foundation. And as the head of the Ms. Foundation and in her work before in government and in policy, Teresa has always been a leader, always on the front lines, and always somebody so willing to step forward and support other women's groups across the sector of all the issues that we all care deeply about, but particularly on this one, we are grateful for your leadership. Thank you for being here, Teresa. This woman I got to meet last year when I booked her to give a TED Talk at TEDWomen, and she blew everyone away. The talk is on TED.com. You can go and see it among the other millions of people who are looking at it. Miriam Zoila Pèrez is a doula, among other things. She's also the gender columnist for Color Lines, a wonderful online news service, and has written widely, including a book called Radical Doula. And Miriam managed in a talk on the TED stage to talk about maternal mortality and to bring the subject of reproductive rights right straight to our own homes and families. And that's part of what we want to do tonight, too. So each of these people have come a very different path to this subject. And as such, I think can help us see a spectrum of work and a spectrum of opinions, and in my opinion, a spectrum of hope that we really might find common ground. So Dr. Parker's written a new book, and I want to make sure that I announce the title of it correctly, because I hope you'll write it down and immediately order a copy. Life's work. Yes, I'm looking for the exact title to make sure that I have it. It's Moral Choice.
It's Life's Work.
Life's Work.
A Moral Argument for Choice.
Okay, this is what is so interesting about where this starts, because for you it started with an aha moment mid-career even.
Sure.
Please tell us that story.
So I've been a physician now, this year makes 27 years, and that includes 4 years of OBGYN training. So I've been a practicing OBGYN now for 23 years, and for the first 12 years of my practice, I didn't provide abortions. It wasn't that I thought it was morally wrong for women to do that, because I even financially supported friends in securing abortion in college. But I felt morally conflicted about what it meant to provide that care in my identity as a Christian. I had my religious conversion experience at the age of 15, growing up in the South in Alabama, the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, in my opinion. And I was able to navigate my life as I matured without having to think critically about reproduction, because I'd never faced an unplanned pregnancy. I had my own sexual debut at the age of 21, so I was compliant with my understanding of Christianity. But it was when I became an OBGYN and saw women who had unplanned, unwanted pregnancies or wanted but lethally flawed ones on a regular basis, that I had to decide what it meant to call myself a women's health provider and yet be unable to provide one of the most essential services that now 1 in 4 women in this country will need by the time they're age 45. So having not received any abortion training, I was always able to punt. I couldn't do what I didn't know how to do, but I also lived in communities where abortion wasn't the standard of care and people would be passed on. Fast forward to being on the faculty at the University of Hawaii and being responsible for a clinic that provided care for women where they had enjoyed access to abortion since 1970, as Hawaii was one of the first states to legalize abortion. And we had a nice but fundamentalist Christian administrator who decided to take away that service. And so now women were being denied access to a service that they had had access to. And what that meant for me was I was now placed in a corner where I had to do values clarification. Given that I wasn't opposed to abortion, I had to decide what was impeding me from providing the care. And I was partial to listening to inspiring speakers at that time. And my cassette tape, where I'd been listening to Dr. Martin Luther King, yes, it was a cassette tape. I was listening to his very last sermon, the mountaintop sermon, most people know it as. But in that sermon, he described what made the Good Samaritan good. The Good Samaritan story is a Christian story I'd learned growing up in Sunday school and as a Christian. And in substance, the story was that someone was on the side of the road, injured from a robbery, and everyone in the community passed that person by. And the Samaritan, the person who stopped it and provided assistance. Dr. King said that what made this Samaritan good was his ability to reverse the question of concern. And whereas everyone else asked, what will happen to me if I stop to help this person? The Samaritan asked, what will happen to this person if I don't stop to help? And that hit me in my gut as someone who, with a Christian understanding, for whom the most essential value of Christianity was love and compassion. I found that me not providing the service, given that I wasn't morally opposed to it, was a form of cowardice. I was more concerned about what other Christians would say or think. And as a result of that, it was no longer good enough for me to simply refer people on. And in this case, I decided to fight for the reproductive rights of women when it was being taken away on my watch.
And the reaction of your family and the community of faith, of which you were a very real part and still are?
Well, my family didn't find out literally what I did until July 1st, 2012. I lived in Hawaii from 2002 through 2006. Now in 2012, I became the plaintiff in a lawsuit for the state of Mississippi to keep that, the only clinic in Mississippi, open. And Melissa Pèrez invited me onto her show. And so I thought I might want to give them a heads up. So I told them that I was going to be on the show. I didn't tell them about what. And I was being interviewed about my decision to become a plaintiff in that lawsuit. And so afterwards, they called and everyone said, oh, you look great on TV. And it wasn't about what I said. It was all about, you have the Parker smirk. And what I came to find out was that they were supportive of reproductive rights independent of me. And so what it meant was that I had unnecessarily foregone their support because I was afraid to have that conversation. So my family knows what I do and they're supportive. Now it's kind of 50-50. People who knew me 35 years ago as a fundamentalist Christian boy preacher either have accepted the fact that I'm now a 54-year-old man who thinks for myself, or they think that I've gone way off the rails as a Christian. I've started thinking for myself a long time ago, and so I'm aware of what they think and respectful of what they think, but I don't live by what they think.
Unfortunately, a lot of women live with choice because of what you think. And we'll come back to the way in which you have defined the moral choice, as it's very much a part of this conversation. And Vera, when I first began to read some of the work that you were publishing in Teen Vogue. And I flash back to my early days as a journalist when we were told 2 subjects you never, ever write about or report on because you cannot win, no matter how careful you are with facts. One of them, of course, abortion, and the other being peace in the Middle East. And the networks lived by that rule for a very long time. It's hard for us to remember, but there were no stories on reproductive rights or the right to choose for a long time. This was a very brave choice for you, and in an environment in which such subjects weren't regularly written about. What brought you there, and what was the response?
So, when I first interviewed for the job, I'd already been a freelance writer, and originally they came to me and they were like, hey, we need a sex and dating writer. And I was like, okay. I look at teenvogue.com and I searched boyfriend, and there were like 600 results. And it was like what to buy your boyfriend on Valentine's Day, dates to go on with your boyfriend. And then I searched the word vagina, and there were 0 results. So I was like, I think you guys need a sexual health writer. So by the time they came up with this wellness editor position, they basically based it off of what I was already writing. And so the interview was kind of a fake interview because I already had the job. So they were like, do you have any, I came in for the interview, the whole interview was basically just them asking, do you have any questions? And I only had one question, which was, when can I write about abortion? And
that was the first question in your interview?
Yeah.
You are brave.
And so the reason why I think it's important is because I think that everybody deserves to have information before they need to ever use it. And I grew up with, I'm really grateful. I have a dad who's a research scientist. He does cancer drug development. My mom's a cardiologist. Bodies and health was never a taboo. Like when I got my period, we talked about it at the dinner table. So for me, I saw how a lot of my friends went through really difficult times that could have been prevented had they been able to have access to information and maybe even support from each other, had they had it before they ever needed it. And so for me, I just think ultimately, the more that you know about your body and the more accepting and kind you are to your body, the better choices you'll make. And I don't care if someone thinks that abortion isn't for them. I think that's great because they've made a decision for themselves. But I think that you first need to know what it is before you can have an opinion. And so for me, it's not really even about trying to change people's minds to agree with me about what I think. It's more about really empowering people to believe what's right for them. And that's impossible unless you have information.
What was the reaction to the first time?
So the interview was with the director of Vogue. And it was funny because I didn't really know what the reaction was going to be, but I knew that was what was going to make me decide whether or not I wanted the job. That was really it. Because if I couldn't write about something like abortion or even masturbation was the next question, they really were sweating by the end. They were like, okay, please leave. But the answer was like, you have to take steps to get there, but if you can basically build a foundation to make that topic seem like it fits, then you can write about it. Maybe not like tomorrow, but maybe in 6 months. It took over a year, just so everyone knows. It took a while for me to really push for it. It took, Texas going through a lot with losing their providers. It took a lot of emails to my director with personal stories so that he realized, okay, Vera's right, we should probably do this. But the reaction was just, I think it was what they needed to say to get me to take the job, I think, but I don't think they really thought that I could do it. And so, but really the first the most important thing, I think, in terms of learning about and accepting your own body and your identity is a comprehensive sex-positive sex education. And I know that that's not really accessible to most people in the US, so I was like, this section of Teen Vogue really needs to make up for that. So I worked with Planned Parenthood and a lot of other sex education providers to make sure we had the best experts, the most accurate information, and we just presented it as is. We didn't sugarcoat it. We didn't give any, now we have some opinion pieces that we make sure that we label them op-eds, but really it's just information. And so by the time that we got to abortion, it was the only thing that we weren't talking about, and it was kind of awkward. So we kind of just had to do it.
And so now there are many, many more people going to Teen Vogue for different kinds of information than they might have been going to before. And that's got to have a generational impact, which will be very important for this discussion as it moves forward. And speaking of Planned Parenthood, it should be noted that Teresa is one of the people who's received Planned Parenthood's Dreamkeeper Award. And there are many reasons for that, Teresa, because you have been a dreamkeeper. You've kept this dream alive as you have provided funds and support for the groups that are out there trying to make sure women have protected access to equal and choice and also reproductive rights. So this is a scary moment in this country in terms of women's health. Writ large, it seems more in jeopardy than ever before. How are you feeling? What is the scariest part of this moment in terms of what you are observing among the groups that you work with all over the country?
So the scariest part of this moment for me are the 13 white men who just passed or tried to introduce the new healthcare plan. That is the scariest part for me. Because if we fully understood what reproductive health was about, those 13 men would understand that they needed to support it for themselves and for their wives and their daughters and the next generation. That's the scariest part. And it's frustrating. But I'm an eternal optimist. So I also look at this and I say, this is an opportunity for us to come together. There has been a generational divide. There has been a racial divide in an open and honest conversation that needs to take place in this country around reproductive health. And it's not just the A word, it's not just abortion. It's a comprehensive understanding about what reproductive justice is about. And I think we're having more open and honest conversations, not just about whether you agree with me and my position or not, but what does bodily autonomy look like for women? And how do we support full and comprehensive access to women's health in a sense that looks at them as full contributing members of our society around economic justice and racial justice and all of the pieces that go into that. And so I refuse, every morning when I get out of bed, I refuse to be driven down by this. I have the quote in my bedroom and in my bathroom and in my office. And it says, be the kind of woman that when your feet hit the ground, the devil says, oh shit, she's up. And I need to be that woman, but I am so lucky because I get to work with those kind of women across the country. Gloria Steinem was that woman, but so is a Jessica Rojas. And so is Marcia Olivia, and so is Tanya Espinoza. So when you look around this country, we have women and men who are waking up. It's Dr. Willie, right? Who are waking up every day and saying, we will continue to fight for what is right in this country and what that needs to look like. And we cannot be separated out in a conversation that marginalizes what is happening to us. And we need to stand up and step forward and talk about the intricacies of this. This is about trusting women to make the decisions that are best in their lives. And that is a challenge for our society. It is a challenge around masculinity, it's a challenge around patriarchy, it is even a challenge around capitalism, but we won't go there today. But it really is a recognition, and at the Ms. Foundation we have been trusting women for 44 years, and I just get to be at the helm that brings the intersection of women of color, race, class, and gender into the conversation more in a full force, to say that this is a scary moment, but this moment will not dictate the rest of our lives. I honestly believe what has happened in the past 44 years is in many ways a winning of the hearts and minds of the population, of the general population, and now we're looking at policies. Policies do not dictate hearts and minds. Policies are what goes on the books. And I believe that there are more people in this country who have hearts and minds that respect women's bodily autonomy and their full decisions to make a determination about what's going to happen in this country. I believe that is what is going to win out. It may take us a little bit longer to fight that battle, but there are more women and men that are waking up, and the devil's, complaining about it.
I am sure glad you're up. I love that I can think of you every morning getting up, and that'll make me feel a whole lot better.
I'll send you the quote. You're that woman too.
I'd love to have it. And part of that being up is waking up, as you say, to the facts that are part of this emotional issue. And one of the facts that you brought so brilliantly forward, Miriam, in your work is that the maternal mortality rate that is so appallingly bad in this country. We have women without the kind of just basic access to reproductive health. And that seems to get lost, doesn't it? And when the conversation turns to the emotional aspects of the right to choose.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a few panels this weekend about maternal mortality, but they're focused on international maternal mortality, which is really a horrific problem. But there are places in this country where the maternal mortality for Black women is equivalent to the maternal mortality in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's parts of Mississippi and other places, particularly in the Deep South. And the interesting thing is actually that some people do have access to care, and they're still having really bad outcomes. So the problem is not just about getting people to care, but it's about getting people to care that's good and that actually addresses the needs that they have in their lives. And a lot of the work that I've been doing and what I talked about on the TED stage was about stress and the impact of stress, particularly on people of color, so the ways in which discrimination leads to stress, leads to poor health outcomes. And there's a much clearer physiological mechanism for that pathway now. There's a lot of research about it. And we experience it, right? We feel how stress impacts us on a daily basis. And so that's a part of the story that we're telling, right? So, and you can imagine the increased amount of stress that you experience when there's all these barriers to getting the health care that you need, when you can't end the unintended pregnancy that you want to end, when you can't get the care that you need to give birth, things like that. So it's an interesting and really challenging part of the picture that we have to face.
And the stress just got higher as the defunding efforts continue, and as it becomes more and more of a challenge for women everywhere, but in particular in the vulnerable areas you mentioned.
Well, and I mean, I feel like the racist climate of this country has been really put on blast, right? Like that it was racism that we knew, many of us knew existed, but is so kind of condoned. And I mean, the president of our country says things that are blatantly racist. And so I think that, that creates an environment that just amps things up. And also we've seen increases in hate crimes and things like that, right? So there's really legitimate and real parts of the ways that our political environment impact people's lives, even just beyond the policies that get passed. And so, but what I wanted to say something was interesting about this conversation and what you said about politics, and about the media, because I've actually made my entire career as a journalist on writing about reproductive rights. And that's been my whole sort of beat. And so the idea of being in a journalistic environment where that's not allowed, or where that's frowned upon, I think it's a testament to the changing of our media environment, that there are publications now where that's completely acceptable and expected to have a whole person dedicated to covering things like reproductive rights and abortion. So I think it's important to acknowledge that shift too.
And in Teen Vogue, no less.
Yeah. Yeah.
The intersectionality of all of these issues, a word that we use a lot when we look at all of the ways in which the challenges come together and usually impacting the most vulnerable and marginalized, the population that you serve, Dr. Willie. And I'd love you to talk about how you see this from your point of view as an African-American man of faith and observing the women that you are serving, and the whole question around patriarchy and its approach to who owns a woman's body.
Well, I like that you mentioned the whole notion of intersectionality. I don't know who said, but somebody said that none of us live single-issue lives. When we all have identities, I can rattle off 4 of mine right off the top of my head. I'm Black, male, heterosexual, and Christian. And all of those either serve to empower me or to make me at risk for oppression. And so it comes down to understanding that all of those identities are the way in which they interact. It is not additive, it is synergistic. So in any given time, any one of those identities can rise to the top to either put me over the top or sink me. The reality is that there's so much about those identities, though, that are determined by other people. And so when I look at the fact that in the South, about 60% of all African American people in this country live in the South. All right, and when I look at the fact that the Southeast region has the greatest percentage of laws that are being passed to restrict abortion and reproductive right access, there's a paucity of medically accurate sex education that you allude to. There is no funding for abortion, contraceptive access is greatly limited. And so all of these things come together to be the reproductive determinants for women of the South, and they end up being life determinants because women who are forced to remain pregnant, say, for example, they looked at women who rely on Medicaid for their health care. And when those women faced an unplanned pregnancy, 30% of those women said that had they had the funding, they would have not continued that pregnancy. So having a bill like the Hyde Amendment that prohibits the use of Medicaid funding for women relying on that for their care impacts whether or not a woman living in Mississippi, living in the Delta, who has 3 children and who finds herself pregnant, whether or not she can get the money to get to Jackson, where the only clinic is, wait the 24 hours that a waiting period has been imposed, be forced to listen to me tell her that an abortion can increase her risk for breast cancer when that's not medically accurate information. She has to put all of these things together to be self-determining. So in that state, and when women face these challenges, a reproductive decision becomes, a health decision becomes an economic decision. And it goes to that notion that that women living in that part of the country, which led me to prioritize it, they don't live single issue lives. It also, they have to wrestle with a high degree of religiosity, the conflation of reproductive decision making with a particular religious understanding. And so, as someone who also has a religious understanding, it's led me to think that the framing of the question may be off. It may not be a question of a civil discourse. It may be more of a question of honest disagreement. And I think honest disagreement may be different from civil discourse, may be different from common ground. So maybe how we ask the question will determine what answers we come up with, because the question appropriately asked is 50% answered.
So are you don't believe common ground is possible, or we're just framing it the wrong way and trying to get to a place of agreement?
I believe common ground on this issue may be off in that when we talk about common ground, what is the ground we're standing on? And in the context of reproduction, the ground that we're standing on is the bodies and the lives of women. And so the question then becomes, are women's lives and bodies public space? That other people should be weighing in on decisions about processes that occur in their body. So if we agree that women are human and equal to men, and that men enjoy agency, that nobody questions the decisions they make around processes that occur in their body, is common ground agreeing that women are equal in their agency and they shouldn't be questioned about their decisions? Or is common ground that I have to indulge your sensibilities around what's the appropriate role of reproduction in the life of a woman? So I think we need more precision to the question. So if common ground is the decision, maybe if common ground is the goal, I'm asking what is the question?
Well, I certainly wish you were asking that question among those 13 men who were making that decision. But it does seem, and Teresa, you've been doing this work for so long, why is it so hard to frame this in the total story of women's health? You know, we do get down this rabbit hole and this discussion of abortion and lose all the other ramifications that are a part of the defunding that we're facing now in national health.
Wow, you know, we only have probably 20, 30 minutes left on the panel, so I can't even go into the fullness of the conversation. What I will say is, you know, we need to have a full understanding of the historical perspective of women as property and what that looks like, the role of religion in the conversation and in storytelling of religion in conversation, and where that sits and holds space. And then we need to look at, particularly when it comes to people of color, women of color in this country, a real serious conversation about women's bodies. Because I think there is a disconnect around what is happening and an understanding of what is happening in women's bodies from a scientific approach. And people impose a religious or opinionated aspect to it that is not about truly what's happening in women's bodies. The other side of that is we have created a disconnect of the true narrative. The voices of women, particularly women of color, have been so suppressed in this country. I mean, we're lucky that we have Miriam to tell some of these stories and to tell them in an accurate way, that we never put all the pieces together. We have totally taken women and said, oh, they're successful because of this, or they're not successful because of that. And, you know, whether it's the welfare mom or the woman who seeks an abortion, we create these mechanisms that don't tell the fullness of their lives. And Audre Lorde was right? The conversation about the many parts of our lives that we bring together, but we don't talk about them comprehensively. So this isn't just an economic justice issue. This isn't just a reproductive justice issue. There's also safety that goes into that conversation. And what does a vision look like for a truly inclusive, balanced community and society, right? I mean, if we looked at, in the South particularly, how women, black women particularly, bodies were seen, they were property. They were raped. They were forced to have children so that they could work the fields. They had a baby one day, they worked the field with the baby on their back the next day, right? And the master did that, right? And so you lose all of that. And until we get really uncomfortable about the realities of women's bodies and the history of them, we can't have a comfortable conversation about how we get to common ground. Until we understand that there's a determination of power and where power plays into a conversation, we can't get to common ground. And so Dr. Willie is 100% right. This is a conversation that has to have us all be a little uncomfortable. I mean, you know, Vera knows this well, and she said it, we don't have a comprehensive sex education conversation in this country, not from age 3 and not to age 16. We don't have anything. So most girls don't know what's going on with their bodies. Boys know even less. The strategies around masculinity then play a role, power and all of those all play into it. And so I think they're very complex about the why. It's not any one thing. There's also cultural understandings, there's also socioeconomic understandings that get played into all of it. And so I think we have to figure out how we're going to inform women and young women about their bodies. And we also have to inform men about women's bodies, because they are making determinations right now, hopefully not forever about what happens with women's bodies when it comes to health care and access to that care.
Thank you for that perspective, and it leads me right back to you, Vera, because you are the generation that really and often doesn't know this history, doesn't know this context, and has grown up with reproductive health access. So what are you hoping will result from the work that you're trying to do, and what has been the response back to you from the generation of teens?
I would say that my goal is for not just the younger generation, but my generation and generations older than mine. My goal is for people to really understand their bodies and to not just be learning about their own bodies, but other people's bodies, because ultimately I think that disconnect to me is a very clear reason for people making decisions or having opinions that aren't necessarily accurate. They're based on things that they've learned that aren't true. I think, with teen Vogue readers, they're young, they're not jaded yet. If you tell them, you don't need to really give them the whole history necessarily of what's been going on with women's bodies. You just have to tell them, hey, guess what? You get to do whatever you want with your body. And if they believe that, then they're going to believe that the person next to them gets to do the same thing. And so to me, there's the way to sort of provide the unlearning of a lot of, we all need to unlearn a lot, but the reason why I love my job is because our readers, they haven't learned quite as much wrong as we have, and so when you start from the beginning and you just, it's interesting with sex ed, it's funny that it's so hard to get people on board with just providing good sex ed in public schools, because it really shows you how afraid people are of providing information. And they know, if we give these kids medically accurate information, then they're going to argue with mom and dad, and then they're going to vote differently than mom and dad, and we're not going to be able to keep, power over different communities and groups of people because suddenly they just know better. And I think when the older that you get, that's sort of what you start seeing. But when, with Teen Vogue and the work that we're doing, it's really providing as much of the whole picture as we can. And of course, we have opinions too, but that comes later. I really care about making someone really look at their own identity, understand it, accept it. And that is really the beginning of how you're going to look to the next person and say, oh, I understand and accept your identity and your body too. Because if you don't start with yourself, you're never going to be able to have that level of acceptance for another person. And so when you have a generation, kids in high school and in college, a lot of them don't even want to use labels, for their gender, their sexuality, their relationships, their race. We have kids writing it all the time, and they're like, well, I'm black, but I'm also just a person. I don't have to be a black person. That's not my identity. And it's interesting, young women are like, I don't identify with feminism, because that to me is about women and I'm about everybody. And of course, that is what feminism is, and we have a big branding.
Anybody in this room who has children, teenagers or grandchildren, has heard that, oh no, I live in a post-gender world. I come back and see me in 10 years.
But yeah, I think that with the internet and with social media and providing this kind of information, even if you're the only gay kid in your town that you know of, you can go on Twitter and you can find a bunch of other gay kids. If you're a trans girl and you're the only trans girl that you know and you feel like you're the only one, you go on Tumblr and you have other kids documenting their transitions and showing you that you really can be who you are. And I think ultimately Teen Vogue and what I think is important too is providing a safe space and also providing support. I launched the first and only sexual assault awareness campaign that Teen Vogue has ever known. And we had this conversation earlier today, and it was, no matter how many women's stories you tell when it comes to sexual assault, there are going to be Bill Cosbys that just get to walk out the door and then potentially get paid for teaching people how to avoid accusations. And I never thought that telling women's stories was going to change anything, other than it would make other women realize that they weren't alone, and it would make in terms of sexual assault, for example, it makes you realize, oh, I'm not the only person this happened to, and I'm allowed to talk about it. And I think that's the other thing, is breaking taboos and removing the stigma from topics and allowing conversation that allows information to be spread, which is the scariest thing I've realized to adults and people who are trying to control you. It's really just information. That's all it is.
Well, let's bring the rest of this community into this conversation with some questions. And if you just bring the house lights up a little bit so that we can see faces. And someone has a mic standing here. And if you raise your hand for a question, and you may address it to the entire panel or anyone you'd like. And if whoever sees the hand, just go, because I can't see. Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is a great panel. My name is Teresa, and I'm a pollster, and I've been studying public opinion for the past 3 years on abortion. And like half of every day for 3 years has been studying this. And I just want to challenge the notion of that common ground doesn't exist. When I first started studying public opinion, we think the public is divided because we see polls that show the public is divided. The main question that pollsters ask is whether abortion should be legal or not, and in what cases. And by the way, 62% of voters think abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Only 11% of voters think abortion should be illegal in all cases. So there's common ground even on that question. But when I started studying this issue, I thought, okay, this has been legal for 44 years. Why are pollsters still asking about legality? And so I asked with Vox, not Fox. We did a study where we said, I want to ask questions that are grounded in reality. So we asked, let's say a woman decides to have an abortion, 1 in 4 women will. Do you think the experience should be supportive, unsupportive, accessible in her community, not respectful or more pressured? 75% or more say supportive, respectful, not shamed, inner community, all of these things, which, by the way, when I'm in focus groups, that's what I hear from people, even from people who have that identity as pro-life. So anyway, just a comment that I just wanted to challenge even the framing of the panel, that we need to seek common ground when I think majorities are already there. Maybe not on what Teresa said on power and bodies and intersectionality. I don't think we're there yet on in terms of public opinion, but on abortion rights, I think there is a lot of common ground.
Is that surprising to you?
I absolutely
Sounds like
think-
good news.
Yeah, I think there is common ground. I think the reality is, when we're talking about women's reproductive health, we're talking about a panoply of issues. It is not just about abortion. It is about access to birth control. It is about fertility treatments. There is a broad conversation to be had, and if we really want to have a conversation about reproductive health, and you have it in that context, you find a lot more common ground than you find disagreement. And if, as a country, we say we are going to value family, then the determination of how large, when, and if is really a determination that I think many people feel that an individual should be able to make, and there is common ground in that. I go back to what Dr. Willie was saying. How are we determining the conversation or the question that we should be asking around the determination around what common ground looks like? And I think what you're saying is that the research, in the way that you are asking the question, shows that there's much more common ground in that conversation.
If the common ground is allowing you to quantify the mushy middle, how does it make a difference? And what I mean by that, and I hear you and I appreciate what the reframe, part of what feels problematic to me about the common ground and getting people to acknowledge certain realities, but it hasn't translated into policies that will empower women and their reproductive realities. We've had we are illuminating that people have political ideology and their lived experiences. I do abortions on people who don't believe in abortion all the time, right? But in terms of what is the goal and what is the question, what are we assessing? If common ground is the goal, towards what end? Are we looking for a policy shift by establishing common ground? Or will honest disagreement lead us to illuminate the harms that's found in the positions that people hold? For example, if we reframe away from the narrative that lends itself to great theater like pro-life, pro-choice, tastes great, less filling, right? From a policy standpoint, what we should be establishing is policies that are pro-reproductive rights and policies that are anti-reproductive rights. And so that honest disagreement about people who are anti-reproductive rights don't want to have abortions, they don't want to do them, but they don't want anybody else to have them. People who are pro-reproductive rights have abortions, do abortions, and they want anybody who wants to have one to be able to get one, but they're not encouraging people who are opposed to abortion to have them. So if what we want policy-wise is what should be the default position from a policy standpoint on an evidence basis, it has to be pro-reproductive rights, because that's the only way everybody's position is accounted for. If you don't agree with abortion, you're certainly free not to have one. But are you entitled, because you don't agree, to stand in the way of somebody else? So what's problematic for the mushy middle, the people who 60% say, I believe in abortion in some way or the other, how are they voting? How are they voting?
And what's also problematic is that things like the global gag rule,
Right.
where you can't even talk to a woman about family planning or family health. And
This goes to the responsibility that the United States has and the leadership role that we have constantly played around these issues. And the fact that the gag rule has been reinstituted is an insult on the movement, international movement around what's happening and what we know to be true around reproductive health in other countries. And Miriam mentioned it, when we talk about maternal health and we talk about disparities in healthcare internationally and within the United States, we are not so far removed. And we have to have very real conversations. And the United States has a role to play. And it is a sham that the leadership of this country right now does not respect the role that we have when it comes to reproductive health in the United States and around the world.
Can I add just one last thing about one of the things I want to make sure when we talk about common ground and civility often get used interchangeably, right? And common ground will lead to civility, but does it lead to progress? The Mojave Gunship says honest disagreement leads to progress. And what progress means to me is that we will have sound evidence-based policies that don't infantilize women in their agency and that don't make them bystanders in their lives. Dr. King said that what was immoral about slavery was that people were relegated to the status of things. When you make a woman's primary identity childbearing, no matter what her intentions are, you make her an incubator, and you demote her from the status of a person to the status of a thing. People should always be ends and not means. You can voluntarily make yourself a means, but nobody else should be able to make you one. I voluntarily do abortions for women, and therefore I'm a means to their reproductive empowerment, but nobody should be able to force me to do that. So that's kind of where I'm more, for me, the discourse around civility and common ground, but we're not moving policy, makes me less enamored with the notion of common ground.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. I see 3 or 4 hands, and I haven't even seen them over here. And so, where's the mic right now?
She's right here.
All right,
She's
good.
back.
Let's start there. And then what we may do is take 3 in a row. So if you take that one and then come to these 2 quickly, that might help.
Hi, okay, I'd just like to say thank you guys so much for coming out. Teresa, I kind of wanted to take up your subtle invitation about capitalism because that was awesome. And basically when all this talk about reproductive health made me think about reproductive labor. And of course, like traditionally, Marxist feminists believed that men in society were responsible for productive labor and women were responsible for reproductive labor. And recently, I mean, not recently, but since women have started to enter the workforce, there has been this perception that there has been progress in not just feminism, but also that women have more choices because they can work now. But of course, like, in my opinion, I don't really see the progress if you're a low-wage worker and you have to go and work 12 hours a day, 13 hours a day, and then come home and take care of your children. And then, I think about my life, and like, I would love to have children, sooner than I think I should have them, because I know that I need to be more financially stable and et cetera, and all of these things. And so that being said, I was wondering, this is to all the panelists, about how much progress you think we have made, and how much more progress you think should be made.
Okay, great. Let's hold that one and let's take 2 or 3 more so that we can get them all answered. Get as many questions. Yes, and try and make it a question, please. So
Absolutely.
that we can move
Have it written down. I'm ready to go.
Good for you.
Hi. So I'm wondering, within our current political climate and that sort of thing, do you think there realistically is much hope of policy change, positive policy change, in the next 3 or so years? And if so, should we be pushing our energy into that, or should we be channeling our energy into something that's more in the private sector that's going to do that sort of thing? Where should I put this?
Let's stop there because yours is connected to that other question, progress and what should we be doing to get more progress. So answers to that. Is the answer policy?
I had a conversation with, you all encouraged us to have conversations with people you didn't know. There's someone here who does economic development in Africa. I think her name is Jemima. She's in the audience. And we were having a conversation about the role of men in the empowerment of women. But one thing that gave me an epiphany, she talked about, I talked about here, where women, as they've had identities outside the home as professional identities, but they're still expected to do domestic duties, that they do double duty. But she said in Kenya and Africa where she works, women do triple duty. They have domestic duty, they have productive duty outside, reproductive duty, and then they have social duties. And so the whole notion of the reset and where the way forward would be the notion of the redistribution of work across gender lines as an empowerment for women. So in other words, as women assume more of the productive duties, men being able to assume some of the domestic work. So the division of labor has to be redrawn, right, so that you don't have to go out and make the bacon and then come home and fry it up.
Right. So Miriam, to this question directly, should we be focusing, because the policies right now are not looking good, and they're getting worse, potentially.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question, because I don't know. I don't focus on policy. I mean, I think for me as an individual, this time since the election has been really, really difficult, and as an individual who's been very engaged in political work, not in necessarily policy, but in politics more broadly, and I really asked myself after the election, like, how am I going to do this job? How am I going to write about reproductive rights in this era? How am I going to, in my sort of worst case scenario mind of like, how am I going to watch all this fall apart and have to cover it? And, I picked myself up a little bit and took a couple of months to mourn that, and then have really figured out what it looks like to move forward. I know for me, I have to focus on the things that are working, right? I have to focus on the solutions. So the issue I talked about the impact of racism on maternal health, my TED Talk was all about a provider in Orlando, Florida, who's been able to get all of her women of color to term with healthy babies, right? So what's working about her model? I have to be putting my energies into kind of building community and in ways that feel life-giving to me. So, I live in Washington, D.C. You'd think that policy would be my life, but there's a whole world around that isn't focused there. So, I think Theresa might have more to say about exactly the political strategy of this moment, but I know for me, I need to focus on the places where I find hope and where we're actually being effective in making change. And that in this moment, it doesn't feel like it's in Washington, D.C.
But you are sharing models that are working, and that's something we need to do too.
Right.
Quickly on policy.
Yeah, on policy. So I would just say that we are in it on the long arc. So we need to have a conversation about 100 years, not about 3 years. and not about 8 years and not about 25 years. We need to have the picture of what the long arc of what these policy changes are going to look like. And so in the long arc, this is an upsetting moment for us, but it is not the end for us. And there will be many more. I have great faith in those that come that are in the making to run for political office. I actually think Washington, D.C. is a mess, but more importantly, we need to be paying attention to what is happening on the state level. So the work that Dr. Willie is doing, the work that Miriam is talking about is really important. And we need more people who agree with a conversation about really who owns the rights to your body. If it is you, they need to be running for political office. We need to be supporting them and making sure that we are understanding what's important to them. We need to be doing it on the state level, on the very local level. Who's in school boards so we can get comprehensive sex education into schools? Who's on the finance board so we can make sure that funding is appropriately put there? Who's running for your local representative? Those are all really important. So, you know, I get that we're concentrated on the chaos of what's happening in Washington, D.C. That is a place that policy is being made. The other places that policy is getting made is in the state houses and on the municipal level and in churches and synagogues and temples and mosques. There are a lot of places where policies are getting made that are activating communities to start taking and making change in their communities.
Well, that seems like the perfect place to end this, but we had 2 or 3 more questions, and I want to honor them. So if it's a very quick question that we can ask, because we have extended our time.
I loved your Dr. King quote about slavery turning a person into a thing, and also your distinction about civility and common ground. So how do you have a civil conversation with someone who truly and deeply believes that a fetus is a person and not a thing?
I try and create an atmosphere of honest disagreement is the beginning of progress, and the notion that we're all entitled to our own opinions and we're not entitled to our own facts, and the fact that there are scientific answers and then there are religious answers, and the answers are not interchangeable. So when somebody says to me that a fetus is a person, I will say to them that I respect that you think and believe that, but that's not a scientific understanding of reproduction. And then if they are willing to have a real conversation about the scientific understanding of reproduction, I can talk about, I can try and bring some precision to the language. I don't have any notions that I can change anybody's mind, because if your mind is closed, if I press on it, it's only going to be more firmly closed. But I can expose you to facts and reality, and then you have to decide if you're going to dismiss them or if you're going to wrestle with them, and then them open the door wider for you to entertain other possibilities. So I think you really have to establish what kind of conversation you're having and then proceed accordingly.
This has been such an interesting, important conversation.
Thank you for moderating it.
And I would like to continue moderating it for some time, but it is time to end our live stream and to provide perhaps food and drink and opportunity for you to talk about what you've heard from these extraordinary people who are devoting so much of their life and work to ensuring that every woman in this country, and if we do our job right as leaders, every woman in the world has access to healthy outcomes for herself and her family. Thank you very much.